Hello, this is Chell. I'm here today with Cora Roelofs. Cora is an activist with the Boston and North American Rojava Solidarity movements. She's a refugee from academia, and she's written many papers on labor and environmental issues. Her political food obsessions have resulted in a kimchi festival, support for the Occupy movement, and public library permaculture. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, I have a few questions. My first question is, well, just to begin, would you mind maybe saying a few words about your current project? What are you working on now? What brings you to this conference here in Hamburg?
I'm very excited to be at this conference in Hamburg, not only because of my um, great love for uh, the Rojava Revolution, but also because I am a member of a very small group of people in the United States who identify as left Greens. And I was very interested in following the work of Murray Bookchin. I actually visited Murray Bookchin in the 1980s and have always identified with the politics of anarcho-communism and also the the embedding of environmental issues political, um, within our political project. So I like to say that I was an Oppoist before Oppo, because these are my politics, and to find the people of Rojava and Greater Kurdistan attempting to implement confederal democracy and women's liberation, environmental ecological economies, this is a project that I have to be a part of and provide solidarity to. So that's what brings me here. Actually, I submitted my paper to the competition and was selected in their very perfect algorithm that resulted in the selection of my paper on food and agriculture. So I'm very happy to be here for that. Our work, just in October, we founded the Boston Friends of Rojava and Syria. The and Syria is because there are a few in our group, including myself, who have always been in solidarity with the democratic resistance against Assad, and for many of the goals which I believe are similar to those of the Rojava Revolution as well. Um, so our work in Boston is we work with the New England Kurdish Association and also HDP Boston. We've done a few educational events on revolutionary women of Rojava and Syria to spread the word, which most people are completely unaware of the issue, and to let activists, particularly in the Palestinian solidarity movement, know about what's happening and its aims and goals. Along those lines as well, we produced a statement in support of International Women's Day. That actually came out of a new formation, the Friends of Rojava in North America, which has representation from many cities across, at the moment, the United States, but we're hoping that that will be expanded to Mexico and Canada. And we were very excited that that statement was published in Turkish and in Kurdish and in Kurdish Question. Most recently, during New Rose Week, we held a demonstration in Boston, and this was part of a national week we called Michael Israel Week, in recognition of Michael Israel, a Hevel who was martyred in November. He was killed by Turkish fighter jets supplied to Turkey by the United States. And we took the opportunity that his family has very graciously offered to draw attention to his death and the goals that he shared with the Rojava Revolution in order to highlight the horrible role that Turkey is playing in annihilating the Kurdish people and the aims of this revolution. So those are some of the activities that we're involved in. We hope in the future to hold more seminars on democratic confederalism, and also we are involved in building popular assemblies in Boston as well, and basically as an act of solidarity, but also in our interests to build the new, following the leadership of the revolution in Rojava.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about food. So my first question: you've spoken a bit about the, let's say, conflict between the country and the city. So people live in the city, but food is grown in the country. So I'm curious, what role, if any, do you see urban farming or urban agriculture playing in resisting capitalist modernity?
It's interesting. I think that I've been involved in urban agriculture movements and projects for a while. I'm involved in two right now. One is, as mentioned, in my local public library. We are building an inclusive, resilient community through permaculture. And permaculture practices are beyond just a kind of gardening technique, although they do emphasize very important things such as soil regeneration and water conservation, which go way beyond what traditional organic gardening practices do. But I believe that permaculture is actually quite revolutionary, and its basic ethics are earth care, people care, fair share. And these overlap very closely with social ecology, actually, in thinking that human beings can have, in fact, a positive impact on the environment as we provide for our needs. So, to me, doing this kind of work, which is demonstration work, which is community building work, which is educational work, which unites people through projects, but also through enjoying the miracle that these plants can transform sunshine and soil into delicious food that we can share together. And also in my community, that includes many immigrants from places where forest gardening was a natural part of their lives growing up, where they're used to trees providing food and community or collective food growing. This is, to me, a very important type of project with many aims that none of which are about making money through farming or providing jobs. I'm also involved in a project which is called Nubia, which is the Nubia United International Benevolent Association, and this is a refugee gardening organization which aims to also help provide food grown on urban lots to Islamic Relief and other refugee organizations, and also to build greater appreciation and engagement of the youth, particularly refugee youth, in the important experiences that their parents and their grandparents have participated in. So you can see with these two projects, and there are many others, the goals are the building of networks, connections, sharing information, and some also technical and practical skills that bring people together and expand our capacities to work together on bigger problems, even. Um, all these goals are really quite in contrast to what many people are thinking that urban agriculture is about, which is providing jobs to disenfranchised urban youth. In the United States, in particular, there's this idea that the sacrifices, say, of white college students to take over land and build things can then result in jobs for people who are economically excluded from capitalism. And this is done through basically these young people's ability to be supported by their parents or by other spoils of neoliberal policies that create inequality. I find very often that those who are promoting the idea of urban agriculture are not looking in any way at the fact that these jobs are never able to actually produce. The funding for these jobs does not come from market relations or selling things, except in very rare circumstances. It all comes from donations from rich people, of land, of, again, subsidizing people to do this voluntaristically, or in direct donations where they're solicited at galas where the uh, youth of color get to serve as servants and pitch masters for these rich people to donate money. This is the dynamics in the United States. It may be different in Europe. But these projects, even those projects, do definitely fulfill this role of building connections, demonstrating alternatives, and orienting people towards ecological growing practices. And all those things are very important. But what I find very nefarious about many projects is that they are used to promote the idea of that social entrepreneurship leads to actual success of people in capital under capitalism, when in fact I was just at an urban farming conference. The keynote speech was given by one of these backyard growers who says he's making a lot of money, and he's selling in through mostly automated processes with he is a half-time employee, and he is selling microgreens, and microgreens are not food, really. They're garnish on yuppie plates. And so, even as some activists are saying, well, community gardens are leading to gentrification, gentrification is expropriation of our urban land and furthering inequality, others are saying, well, we can make money off of those yuppies who are moving into our neighborhood and taking over the housing and paying the high rents, and we'll sell to the restaurants that are serving them. So this right now, I think, is one of the major contradictions that is evident in urban agriculture projects, at least in the United States. But I don't want to dismiss their power in the building of connections, of organizing, and even as a sort of way stage to a deeper analysis of what is really required to undo the destructive capitalist relations that make these projects necessary in the first place.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. So you mentioned permaculture as well as sort of the goal of sharing technical and expertise. And I'm curious because perhaps some of our listeners are unfamiliar with this idea of permaculture. Could you just say a few words? Is it a very technical practice? Is it very difficult? I mean, what is required to set up a permaculture garden? Uh,
Well, that is that's interesting. I would like to be able to lay that out, but permaculture, I think, requires engagement. In fact, how many people become connected to permaculture through they learn about some of the practices that it's about forest gardening, for instance. The forest knows how to take care of itself. They learn that permaculture wants to reduce human labor, understanding that what people don't like about gardening is how much labor it is, and we can have growing practices that minimize labor, minimize inputs. It uses the resources that we have. One of the examples that I used in my talk was from Haiti, where they have a very beautiful permaculture community called the Sadna Forest, which is also in Oroville, India, and in Kenya. And Haiti, as most people may know, has been deforested and destroyed by centuries now of domination, and the suffering there is extreme. However, permaculture says, look, we have all these resources. They will begin by cataloging what are the actual resources that we have. And somebody will say, we have nothing but old clothes and rubble. They're dumping clothes on Haiti. You can find piles of fur coats and ball gowns that wind up in dumps in Haiti. And permaculturists say, well, when you have fur coats, you use them. And so they are building water retaining, they're actually called bunds, to build soil and retain water to slow the passage of water through the landscape, which winds up building soil and building a place where you can then plant trees. And they're doing this by weaving types of old clothes in and out of the rubble that happens to be around, or by cataloging what plants are doing well here. So part of it is a perspective about meeting our needs with the resources that we currently have. And it has a technical aspect because you can learn, it's sort of, there's an engineering edge to it, like how can I use this plastic bottle by burying it in the ground with a sort of cotton wick at the bottom, and then pour my gray water, that is my washing water, into the bottle, keep the cap on, turn it a quarter turn, and then plant my plant in the hole where the wick is so that I can direct my water, which is very precious, particularly in Haiti and would be in Rojava as well, directly to the roots of this tree. Many reforestation projects fail because they don't understand the total social and environmental context. And so permaculture is definitely about understanding that total context and working with the people who are there to understand what their resources are, human and whatever they are, to grow food or medicine or provide shade. There's many different practices and principles, design principles of permaculture, and as a result, there are many books and also many online and in-person courses which are called permaculture design courses, and that's usually how people get access to them. I would direct listeners to the permaculture work of Jeff Lawton and the many videos he's produced, and he is a information sharing machine. Jeff Lawton is in Australia, which is where permaculture originated, and he has an online free permaculture design course that people can do, and it's about recognizing patterns in nature and also many aspects which are built on traditional land management and also recognition of the destructive practices of agriculture. Um, so I could talk for a long time about permaculture, but mostly I just want to inspire your listeners to read about it some more. I was very inspired in particular by a permaculturalist named Toby Hemingway, who unfortunately just passed away. He wrote a book called Gaia's Garden, and others, the Permaculture Cities. And he has some online talks, one of which he discusses the origin of hierarchy through the development in the Neolithic period of a storable surplus that was distributed through the temples, essentially the creation of the state through the monopolization of storable surplus that was made possible by settled communities. So it's a very interesting perspective for this conference in particular that goes back to the historical roots of patriarchy and oppression pre-Neolithic period, in the Neolithic period and post-Neolithic period. He has a lot of interesting things to say about the relationships of hierarchy and domination that were made possible by agriculture. And so I would also direct your listeners to listen to Toby Hemingway's talks on this subject as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Let's take just a short break here to keep the audio. Okay. Okay, and we are back. So my next question has to do with the green movement and organic farming. So the green movement started, let's say, in the U.S. in the 70s with some organic farmers in California who were growing salad greens for restaurants, and they had the idea to do it in a small scale way without using fertilizers and pesticides, and to produce very fresh greens. And however, very quickly, large farming companies, having recognized the profitability of this organic produce, used their superior market position to push the original sort of hippie farmers out of the organic food market. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the threat of capitalist appropriation and perhaps some ways that it would be possible to resist this appropriation.
Sure. I mean, one thing that I addressed in my talk was the issue of labels and certifications, and we are coming up with more and more labels and checklists as a way of attempting to remove the evil from capitalist food production, or make some of us feel better about enjoying the overall spoils of capitalism while we're doing it. I think this is what contributes to the growth of animal rights activists and veganism, et cetera, as well as organic food buyers who are really aware of the moral challenges of living in capitalist modernity. They're aware that what they enjoy and their convenience is comes at the expense of someone, and so they really want to know that there's something they can do that is pure, how they can spend their dollars or make choices, personal choices. But we know that this is not about personal choices that are provided by capitalism, and that capitalism will always, if we want to buy it, they'll produce it. Um, Co-optation of the organic movement is something that the organic movement, as I would say, is embodied by organizations such as the Northeast Organic Farming Association. Is they are constantly aware of this issue and this tension. In some ways, it has bolstered and supported them, that there are successful companies that can donate to the social movement that is spreading ecological farming practices and small farms. On the other hand, they're aware that these certifications are being used against them to strangle small farms and to shut out people who can't invest in the enormous bureaucratic infrastructure and machinery, et cetera, certifications that are required. And so, in fact, many of the farmers that I know reject all state intervention, including state-led certifications of organic, et cetera, and they rely much more on knowing their customers, small scale, engaging with people. If you have a question about how I'm farming, I'm fully transparent and you can talk to me about it. And that's really, if it's not transparent, if you don't know how your food is grown, don't rely on a label to tell you anything, because that label, for instance, will not tell you that your food is picked by a 14-year-old Mexican who has fled a drug war that was caused by U.S. policies, neoliberal policies, et cetera, or NAFTA. Like, all of the major contradictions of capitalism are not resolved by labels and certifications. And probably most people are aware of this, but it doesn't, again, it's not really a sufficient balm for our pain of putting in our bodies things that we know are a product of exploitation of the planet and of people. So I think it's, you have to be critical and try to understand these things more and more. And there's always positive choices to make. It's not just about rejecting things. It's also not about thinking that there is some pure way of living under capitalism. There is not. And so, but we can continually find new things to do and to share rather than to buy, including practices and celebrations. I would say that my efforts, for instance, around the kimchi festival that we had, and kimchi, for those who aren't familiar, is the Korean fermented cabbage that is the basis of the Korean diet. And they have fought very hard for retaining their food sovereignty, their kimchi in blunt uh, in the blunt attack of the capitalist uh, interest in converting the world to the Western energy dense, highly processed food that can be purchased. So the miracle that is kimchi is that it is produced through cabbage, which, in my opinion, is sort of the holy grail of sustenance, and which, by the way, is rarely grown in cities because it takes land and it's large and it takes, it's really a substantive food that needs more of what a more rural or suburban area can provide. And if you compare, for instance, cabbage to microgreens, there's no comparison on nutrition and value that you get from that food. Okay, that was an aside on cabbage, but cabbage is very important. And here I am in Germany. I haven't had any sauerkraut yet, but so kimchi, which is produced by lactobacillus, even just knowing that how kimchi is produced, the miracle there brings you in a different relationship with nature. It reduces your alienation, and so I would say that the alienation labels are a form of alienation, and producing your own food or dwelling in the discomfort of the lack of the moral society that we know that we live in or entering into a conversation with someone who has produced your food, whether they're serving it to you, they've they've made the food for you, or they're growing your food. These are what Murray Bookchin would call forms of freedom. They are practices, micro practices that help us become less alienated and more engaged in. I'd call them revolutionary practices, actually. So that's what I might say about organic agriculture.
Okay, cool. On the topic of finding new practices and forms of freedom, what inspiration can we draw from the Rojava experience regarding food production and distribution?
I wish I had more to say about that. I very much want to be involved in that issue. I have to say, as a solidarity activist, for not very long, um, I started out wanting to engage in solidarity work around food. In fact, that brought me to reading in the very well researched book. Burning Country about the Syrian Revolution to learn of the 15th Garden Project. And in fact, the 15th Garden Project is a European supported effort to help people grow food and sustain themselves in besieged cities in Syria. And so I very much wanted to support this. The people there are very aware not only of the issue of food as a weapon, which is being used um, in Syria very aggressively and to starve people into submission and forced displacement. But additionally, they're aware of, in general, issues around food sovereignty, which is being aware that in Iraq, one of the first things that the U.S. did was destroy the Iraqi seed bank and substitute GMO and Monsanto seeds in the name of modernizing agriculture in Iraq. And so this is something that in Rojava, which has been, in fact, a very agricultural community, primarily it's the breadbasket of the region and of Syria. Wheat is grown as a monocrop. And people are very aware there of the limitations, especially with the embargo. They knew that they could not continue to just grow wheat, and so they've been diversifying and growing vegetables, and more people are engaged in food production. If you go to the website cooperativeeconomy.info, there are a few articles there about food cooperative projects. There's nursery projects, tree planting, new gardening, transition from lentil production only to fruit trees, diversification. I think people are aware of this, but their agriculture remains highly dependent on what are really destructive dependencies on dams for irrigation and also fossil fuels for the wheat production, and also discussion of trade of wheat, of commodity wheat as a source of income. And so I think they're in the midst of transition. And I very much, if in any way I can contribute to, say, promoting permaculture practices, water conservation, and the learning of alternative techniques of growing forest gardens, et cetera, as well as essentially agroecology is recovering traditional knowledge that has evolved over centuries of food growing in regions around the world and was now practiced all over the world. There's a global peasant movement called Via Campesino that is promoting agroecology and other organizations as well. And so as they become more connected to that global movement, I'm hopeful that they will be able to nurture more of these ecological growing practices and begin to shift away from monoculture and dam-fed irrigation. However, it's also true that they are now in the midst of this debate, and I understand that it is a debate about reliance on fossil fuels and also development of their own fossil fuel industry. They wish to develop a fossil fuel refinery, which, as I said in my talk, just as women's liberation is not for after the revolution, but is the revolution, liberation from fossil fuels is the revolution. And I'm hopeful that it will be resolved that way. It turns out that wheat fields are fairly easily converted to sunflower fields, and that sunflowers do produce a very high quality biodiesel that can be used for many purposes. Ordinarily, the growth of biofuels, we get concerned because it displaces farmers around the world, and through violent land grabs, it displaces food production. But in Rojava, it's a different circumstance. They do have lots of agricultural land that a lot of it was owned by the Syrian state that no longer has it anymore, and they have been able to convert a lot of agricultural land into communal and collective operations that are growing food for the people. So I believe that some of the traditional concerns about biofuels are of less concern, and that in Rojava they would have much to gain by converting some of their wheat fields to sunflowers and build a biodiesel refinery rather than a petroleum refinery.
Okay, cool. I just have one last question, and you mentioned the recovering traditional knowledge regarding farming practices, and right now there's been this ongoing debate for I don't know 20 odd years now about genetically modified products, and I'm wondering if you have an opinion about the relationship between technology and food. Should we be using these new technologies, or are they somehow essentially corrupting? Or perhaps you can speak a little bit about that.
Okay, I'm a bit speechless to be asked my opinion on GMOs because, but let me say that in my talk earlier this morning, I led the audience in a hissing and booing session whenever I mentioned the word Monsanto. So, so yeah, there is no role for genetically modified organisms in agriculture. There's no role for corporate produced and seeds I mean, of course, GMO seeds generally are developed to resist Monsanto's glyphosate pesticide, and so there's a dependency relationship there, which is inherently destructive. Modern agriculture, I would say, let's look at these traditional people who have been growing food intensively around the world. There's enormous amount of, we'll call it techniques rather than technology in this case. Again, using the resources that you have, using your awareness of nature, of how water flows through the landscape, of when to plant seeds. In fact, this was the origin of human quote unquote civilization, the building of temples, which are themselves, I just visited one in Mexico, a calendar wherein it helped the people understand when the best time to plant was in order to reap the fruits of their labor in the most productive way. These are the knowledge where people learn from experience and from techniques and technology that is passed down. And we keep evolving. I would draw your listeners' attention to the website Farm Hack, which is about people trying to reduce the physical burden of farming for those who are getting into it, for who have, let's say, not come from farming backgrounds, so that how can we use, for instance, bicycle sort of infrastructure on the farm? How can we not break our bodies by doing sort of simple, appropriate technology designs? This is the technology that we need. The water bottle that I mentioned, which was from Aviram Rosen from the Sadna Forest Community, permaculture in general, is just the intelligent application that is sensitive to both human and social and cultural values and ecological values, and without the aim of profit, which is the goal of all of the technology development of quote unquote modern agriculture. So No, no to GMOs.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thank you so much for participating in this interview. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again with us sometime in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.